Okay, I'm gonna be talking about my work on misinformation in the past a year or so, and I'm gonna skip talking about me because done a good job to introduce myself. So basically, the presentation that I'm gonna do today will probably have majorly three parts. One, providing you the context of the social, religious, political climate in India, and then I'm going to present the study that we conducted on COVID misinformation, and then talk about the effect the misinformation has on society. Um, so, uh, so let's probably begin here. So, what has the news cycle in India looked like? I'm going to be describing a few events. A short disclaimer that it might not be really good content because it has not been a great year. Um, and also I will try not to sound like a news anchor, but yeah. It started when the government of India revoked the Article 370 of Indian Constitution, which revoked Jammu and Kashmir, which is the only Muslim majority state of their special status. This meant that the citizens of Jammu and Kashmir were stripped of the ability to elect their state leadership, and which puts them under the rule of the union government. The, Additionally, what was the worst probably was that they were put under several months in information restrictions with no access to internet. Um, Following that, was the Ayodhya verdict, the infamous Ayodhya verdict, where the verdict was in favor of building the Ram Mandir, and separate 5 acres of land were given to the Sunni Waqf, the Muslim community. So this plot, is the same place where the Babri Masjid was demolished in 1992. um, Going ahead, which is probably the biggest event that started 2020 or 2019 to say, is that the government of India implemented a controversial Citizen Amendment Act where to provide, so basically this act provided citizenship to the refugees from neighboring countries as long as they were not Muslim. So this act was one of the first that put religion overtly for status of a citizenship under the Indian law. Alongside this, the government also went ahead planning the NRC, where individuals had to provide citizenship proof, which particularly created panic among the Muslim minority, since its conjunction of NRC with the CAA sort of leads them to strip out their citizenship. Uh, Now, what followed all of this was a series of protests all over India and globally also. But this protest also led to death of several protesters, injuries to protesters, police officers, damage to public property, detention, and whatnot. Now, as a consequence of this, it didn't stop here, but the consequences only expanded through university violences that occurred in two places, one in Jamia Islamia University in Delhi, where the Delhi police forcefully entered the university during a student protest. Now, the police here was seen to use batons and tear gas, and there were a lot of visuals of students being dragged and assaulted by the police, and the news channels telecasted this. And following that, very soon after, was the JNU attack, where 50 masked people entered the campus with rocks and acid. And after 3 hours of vandalizing or riot vandalizing, the mob escaped, and eyewitness of the attack stated that the police within the campus did not stand by or did not protect them. And they were the members who were accused of this were the Hindu nationalist organizations such as the Bharatiya Janata Party student wing and the ABVP. Now, the violence continues further when the Delhi riots took place in the northeast part of Delhi, where the Hindu mobs were attacked, where the Hindu mobs attacked the Muslims in the area. So the violence actually erupted after a BJP leader had ordered to clear a sit-in by women. against the CAA and threatened if this was not done, he would use his own supporters. So now the rioters saw multiple days of bloodshed, property destruction, rioting, and again, the eyewitness and victims said that the police stood by and did not help them and even probably participated in it. Now, while all this was happening, India had entered the COVID pandemic. And so what is important here to probably note is that when India entered its COVID phase, India was already very polarized in nature, very disrupted in nature before entering. So now when COVID came in, when one of the first few cases was in 30th of Jan, around 30th of Jan, but India went into lockdown only in March. While India was praised for its emergency actions and strict rules, this led to a lot of crisis of minority workers, the economy falling down and everything. It also erupted the infodemic, which I'm going to further speak about. Now, what happened in this is that there were further violence that happened during the lockdown itself, where this was a case of Palghar lynching, where in Palghar district, a group lynched two sadhus, sadhus meaning priests, Hindu priests, and the incident was fueled by WhatsApp rumors of thieves operating in the area during the countrywide lockdown. Now, a vigilant group of villagers had mistaken these three passengers for them and killed them. Now the religious tensions emerged in this case also, where the minority communities were accused of attacking. However, later it was found that the victims and the attackers were both from the same religion. Now, another most famous incident of this year is the suicide of a Bollywood film star named Sushant Singh Rajput. He was found hanging in his room, and this case led to a huge social media outrage, and there were a lot of rumors and speculations around it. So we conducted a study on this event too, and we found that the media houses and politicians were framing narratives for their benefits. I'm not going to present this study today, but I'm sure this can be found online. Moving ahead, we see that there was a lot of social media use for bringing out more violence onto the streets. This was a case of riots in Bangalore, where the violent clashes took place in the Indian city of Bangalore, which was provoked by an inflammatory post on Facebook, which was regarding Prophet Muhammad. So this was alleged to be shared by the nephew of an INC legislator, which led to Muslim mobs arriving at his house and protesting, which turned violent. Several members who were the attackers, were found to be from the Social Democratic Party of India, which is an Islamist fundamental political group. So now this incident was now more expectedly politicized, with politicians and BJP accusing Congress of being the rioters or having links with the rioters. Now, it has become a common sight in India to have incidents of caste and religious violence, and a lot of events have taken place since then. So, for example, the Hathras rape case and the Nikita Toma case. So I think this should be enough to give you a context, but it's not probably the best image of India right now, but that's how it has been. So now you might wonder why I'm talking about all these events and why it is all important. Basically, I want to talk about how all of these events that have happened online and offline have a presence in both of these spaces. So now the events that occur offline find presence online, such as the death of the film star or the Hathras rape case. Whereas now, if you take the other side, the events that happen online find its presence offline, like the cases of the Palghar lynching or the Bangalore riots, which were merely based on rumors. Now, there is a constant flow of information from social media to the streets and vice versa. Now, social media, while we know has become the major source of communication, and with the coming of politicians and media houses onto the platform and having a direct communication with the public, it seems to pose an imminent threat to democracy. Now, these platforms also, in the grab of free speech, allow misinformation and hate to flourish. Now, we do not have, unfortunately, we do not have good regulation either. So the platform or the users are not held accountable, resulting in those misusing the platforms for propaganda having a free reign. So with this context and with this understanding, I'm going to go ahead and present the study we conducted on COVID-related debunked misinformation to examine the false news circulating during COVID and also the various narratives that were pushed through in this. For the methodology, quickly, I'm going to summarize by saying that we use data from Tattle Civic Technologies, which is an organization that collects, which maintains a repository of all the fact check information. So we used data from 6 IFC and fact check organizations and qualitatively annotated these stories for thematic categories, trigger cases, media type, novelty, valence, language, and location. Now I'm not going to explain this now, but going further, we'll deal with it. So there were 2 quarters, 1 hour looking at each story, and there were various iterations of doing this. Now, if we look at COVID-related misinformation, it has risen consistently since the end of January 2020. So this was when the news of Indian students in China was first breaking. But the dramatic pace was since mid-March when the Tablighi Jamaat incident broke, and this was also timed alongside Prime Minister's speeches or the national addresses on COVID and shutdown. Now, one of the hypotheses that we had was that a major event is the driver of misinformation. And this holds true for 2 factors. One, that the event generates interest and curiosity, leading to increase in information and misinformation. And second possibility is that the events generate uncertainty, and to cope with them, there's a lot of more information in relation to that. So this is long attached to the connection of how rumors sort of emerge. So now going further, so the misinformation in India now we can see is often triggered by the news cycle itself. So there's always parallel narratives that are running about in the information spectrum. Now, when we look at the major events that have occurred, like I explained in the first part of the presentation, we can see that these are based on polarized hot button issues. Now, if you look at this graph, we see that in the early weeks of January, CA, NRC dominated the news alongside law and order, which were the university protests and the Delhi riots, to say. And then I can say that the information in these stories were around Indian liberals or minorities, and particularly Muslims and the institutions typically associated with progressive thought. So the top stories over here was something like the students are anti-nationals or the protesters are anti-Hindu, and so on and so forth. And then forward, we go to the COVID stories. To state a few examples, here's on the left, you can see one example of a misinformation story where it depicts a fake story about women anti-CAA protesters at New Delhi being there only for cash rewards. the women in the images are seen in hijabs, thus attacking the Muslims. And this particular story was circulated by Amit Malviya, who is the BJP IT cell person. And the second picture here is two tweets, one by the Delhi State BJP handle and Dr. Harshvardhan, who is the cabinet minister in the Modi government. And both of these tweets link the AAP leader with the Shaheen Bagh protesters, and similar, and this can be said it is similar to the way how politicians in US were attacked by the right wing for affiliation with the Black Lives Matter movement. So this association was used to project a negative value during an election campaign. So we can see that target misinformation was seen to be used against minority communities in these incidents, and the same was weaponized to polarize the election campaign along religious lines. While I cannot claim a clear correlation between the misinformation stories and the online political campaigns, they present a potent combination for social media propaganda. Now, if we go back to the slide, we can see here. Okay, wait, this is not okay. So, okay, moving forward, actually, we can see. So, we also categorize the misinformation based on its contents for the thematic patterns that it showed. So these were some of the major themes: adversity, commerce, culture, ecology, government, politics, remedy, and others. So adversity was stories about physical and emotional suffering of people, which contained graphic and macabre images of sexual assault, physical assault, etc. Commerce was socioeconomic impacts, stories of public and private businesses or of mergers and shutdowns, or panic buying and shoplifting or hoarding during COVID. Culture stories here were the stories of socio-cultural references, including reference to religion, ethnicity, caste, social groups, etc. Ecology was flora, fauna, and the biophysical environment. Government stories involve the actions undertaken by the government around bills, acts, or ordinances. Politics, stories about political events or political actors. And remedies here largely were stories of mainstream or alternative medication to cure or prevent coronavirus. Now, what we went on further doing is that we categorize these categories into two types: one which were instrumental in nature and one were affective in nature. So now the instrumental stories were the ones that had instrumental facts that but were untrue. So stories of cures of various diseases, or natural man-made disasters like the Australia bushfires or the earthquakes. Whereas the affective stories here were the ones that were seeking primarily for an emotional response, which were very emotionally driven, to say. So these were stories of misinformation, stories related to government sanctioned police brutality on, say, COVID lockdown violators, not protesters, or stories on Chinese and Muslim conspiracies to spread the disease. Now, if we go back to the older slide, we can see that the early COVID-related stories under culture were about Chinese people spreading the virus or blaming them for the virus and the conspiracies against the Chinese government. The next period, however, saw a positive stories of cures that were attributed to cultural practices by Hindus, such as vegetarianism, so that the virus affects only people who eat meat. And you see that there's a significant peak after in early April, which is basically when the affective stories kicked in, and the arc over here moves from action to blame. So Similarly, we see that there's a pattern of high effective value for stories relating to culture and Muslim related content on Twitter. For this, we used tweets from our political database, and we set to see if tweets by politicians about the Muslim communities received higher traction. Now, taking the non-cultural tweets as the baseline, we found that the cultural tweets yielded up to 16% more retweets, and the Muslim-related content had about 50% more retweets than other tweets. This was in the 4 months period that we looked at the data. So now the importance here of this is that the ecosystem of hate was already in place when COVID pandemic started. So this basically highlights the whole idea of Muslim targeting here, highlights how diverse and explosive rhetorics can be easily used to sort of do sense making. I'll go on further to explain that. Now, the political climate in India in the recent years has witnessed the rise of right-wing populism. And right-wing populism is usually characterized by polarization or nativist majoritism or authoritarian leadership. Now such a leadership or a majority feeds off the polarization that relies on the existence of an enemy. So now this enemy is an entity that can openly be said to not belong to be part of the collective, and it can be denied voice. Now, this enemy is constructed as an other, not just based on ethnicity, religion, political ideology, or religion, but also through imagined characteristics of morality or perceived practices against the majority. Now, if we look at the graph here, the biggest jump in misinformation stories was in the Nizamuddin Markaz or the Tablighi Jamaat incident, like I said. Why we chose to specifically say that these were specifically annotate for Muslim stories is because they were majorly the majority of the stories under the cultural category. Now, the Tablighi Jamaat story, if some of you are not aware, is basically an incident where Islamic religious preachers from all over the world came down to Nizamuddin in Delhi in March, and this conference ended up becoming the hotspot of transmission of COVID. Not only in Delhi, but subsequently to all the places where all the attendees of this conference went to. And spreading throughout India. Now, what followed this was a flurry of anti-Muslim content. And in the first week of April, when mainstream news started extensively covering the Tablighi Jamaat case, the misinformation similarly changed. For example, the consequent recurring themes in these cases were that Muslims were the carriers of the virus, and they were intentional and malicious spreaders of the virus. And this was done through licking of throats or licking of plates and spitting on food. And these are some of the fake stories that you can see on the screen. Now, this misinformation was further buoyed when the television channels started to repeat the same content, and some channels openly calling Muslims as anti-nationals. Now, this just didn't have consequences online, but also offline, where people refused to take food from Muslim relief workers, where there was a call out for the boycott of Muslim businesses. And there was a lot of violence also, of course. Now, we could see this also in the tweets posted by politicians online by the ruling party. And these were popular figures such as Rohit Chawal or Babita Phogat, calling Jamaati the illiterate, or say that one said Tablighis are spitting and seculars are licking. So very not so covert. Now, to go on further, we looked at the misinformation stories for the valence. we find that they're not just negatively always targeting, but they were also positively natured. For example, the first image over here is about a woman presenting a scientific understanding for clapping, which the prime minister of the country had requested to do for 5 minutes to recognize health workers. But this was sort of spin differently. Whereas the other video here is of Muslim men in a riotous situation, with the claim that this was an attack on the police after the Friday prayers. Now, unlike the video of the women discussing the clapping, this is a reused video from a different context. So the tone here is more aggressive and meant to alarm the viewers. So in the same manner, we looked at the content of the stories to see what kind of stories they were, the novelty. So were they fabricated or new and created now? And these were mostly stories from remedies and transactions, whereas the ones that were recirculated older were more culture and adversity based. Now we saw that information relating to the instrumental category tended to be more text. So saying the ones that were around cures needed to be more textually based and newer in nature because this is not existing. Whereas the affective messages were more visual and multimedia material. And going further, we also saw that there were multimodal types of messages, and we saw that the affective stories in this case were using multimedia stories, so a lot of images, videos, and audios, whereas the ones that were instrumental preferred using text. So now coming towards the end, what we see is that there's a large amount of contemporary work on misinformation, which is automated and semi-supervised. However, our work here shows that misinformation is powered mostly by innuendo, and its true impact can only be understood as part of the larger social environment it inhabits. Now, so here, trying to press on the value of human annotations and is getting a deeper meaning of what is being said is critical. Now, the ecosystem of hate has been highly weaponized in India, and it also exists elsewhere in the world. And the principal takeaway from our paper is that when the dominant or the populist public discourse creates public enemies in the form of population or ideas, this becomes a usual suspect for sense making in any crisis. So, no doubt there will be malicious agents trying to actively pin a crisis. So now looking at social media, they allow this through organized trolling and campaigning. But as we see through the trends in the affective and instrumental information, a point which is equally important is the muddled information environment, and how citizens seeking to cope may be habituated to turn to rumors and hate speech in these moments. Now, probably will end here while saying that a lot of work has shown that the spreading of misinformation has a relationship with the reverberations in the echo chambers and pre-existing beliefs, pre-existing biases and dispositions. So misinformation also serves as a powerful amplifier of existing prejudices, giving voice and internal legitimacy to hate. And the institutional actors, when not responding or actively part of this, increase polarizing consequences in the society. This and highlighting this, that there are consequences not just on the platforms but offline. So now, while there is a whole set of fact-checking organizations who are constantly correcting this information, there are studies which show that there are individuals who choose to be actively informed, actively misinformed. So this is a theory by Emily Thorson where she talks about belief echoes and the persistence of them. So in this case, the fact-checking ecosystem seems redundant because they cannot affect the belief systems. Now, when platforms constantly select information and adhere to the user system of beliefs, they lead to further increased in polarized groups and have an effect on public debates and your views on social movements. So it is necessary to scrutinize the way in which algorithms and ad systems promote or incentivize problematic content, but one also needs to consider the asymmetric media structures that have existed since long. So I'll probably leave the presentation with this question of how to shape our digital spaces as to help weave rather than fray our social fabric. Yeah, I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was amazing. And I invite you all to add Zainab to your Twitter at some point, because she's done some amazing work. And thank you very much.